Okay, welcome back. During this lecture, we are going to talk about scope of variables. That essentially means when you are declaring variables in a method with the main method as well as other methods. So we have variables declared in various different parts of the program, right? So when you are declaring variables inside the different methods and the main method and also outside the main method. So which method can see these variables and then which methods can modify them or access them. So differs based on what's called the scope of that particular variable, right? So based on the scope of the variable, so there are two types of variables usually we define. We call them global variables and local variables, right? So global variables in general are accessible by all the methods. So local variables are local to a particular method and then methods inside it, right? So let's talk about this concept using a real world analogy. So let's say if you have a house with maybe 4 rooms and the living room area. Now in the program scenarios, so now the living room area is common for all the rooms, right? So then all the rooms will have access to the living room area. So then you can think about living room as a global area. So then whatever the things are in the living room area can be accessed by anybody live in these rooms, right? So then let's say if there's a TV in the living room area, so then anybody in these rooms can come to the living room area and then watch the TV. So however, if you have a specific thing in these rooms, so then these rooms can be accessed by the people live in that particular room only. So therefore they are pretty much local for each of these rooms, right? So taking these things as an analogy, when you're writing a program, so we have methods in the program, and then we have the complete main program. If we declare variables outside of any of these methods, so then these variables will be global variables. So it's like a living room area. But when you declare variables inside each method, so those methods will pretty much own those variables and nobody can really access those variables, right? So let's try to get an idea about this scope of variable concept and see how we can translate that thing into a programming context. All right. Now main idea then when you are defining global and local variables is that which variable is local to what. In order for us to figure that out, so we need to kind of identify the block of code in the main program, right? So block of code is essentially a code within curly brackets, right? So then function start with the curly bracket, end with the curly bracket. We just give a name for that particular coding segment. That's pretty much how we refer to that coding segment, by having a name associated with it, right? So then variables declared within the block is local to that particular block, right? So then no other part of the program can access it, right? But variables declared outside the main function are considered as global variables to the program, and then these global variables can be accessed by any method inside the program, right? So in general then accessibility of variables is called the scope of variables. Okay. Now here is one example. So now in this particular program we have a method called value function, and then we have the main method, and then we have the global area data member also. Now if you draw the memory map for this particular program, so we have the large memory area for the whole program, and then we have memory area for the main, and then we have memory area for the value function. Okay. So now when you have these variables defined in different areas, so global num does not belong to the main, global num does not belong to the value function, but it's a common thing. So therefore global num will be allocated in this area, right? And now when you go inside the main method, so we have what is called the local main num. so its value is 10. Now inside the main, so we are saying global num equals 15. Now the first thing the main memory area look at for the main method is to see whether there is a variable called global num in here. So there is no variable called global num inside the main. So then what it does is actually it goes outside of the main and then see if there is something in the global memory area called global num. So then we find it in here. So once you have this variable, so we can update it inside the main method. So when you say global num equals 15, now 15 global variable will be changed, right? Now we go to the value function. So in the value function we have local fun variable, so that's 10. So then that variable is local to the value function. Nobody pretty much else can access it. All right. Now we are saying global num equals 30. Again we look at global num inside the value function. There is no variable called global num inside the main function. So then it goes outside of it and then check whether global num is available in the global memory area. Then it's find the location. So then change this one to 30, right? So therefore all the methods can access the global area. That part is like the living room area, right? Now if I write the statement local main num equals 18 inside the method, so it's going to check whether there's something called local main num in the value function. So there is no method like that. Then it goes outside and then check whether variable is in the global area. It's not in the global area. So then it's going to throw an error saying there is no variable called local main num. So it cannot really go inside this. So that's not possible, right? So then that's the scope of the variable. So therefore a local main num has a scope only to the main method. Likewise, a local fun variable has a scope only for that particular function. So however, global num has a global scope, so therefore both methods can access it, right? Okay. So here is the another example. So as similar to the previous one, so we have the global num variable here, and then we have another variable called dnum as a double value. So then this time actually we have two double variables. Now similar to the previous one, we have local main num inside the main method, and global num 15 will change the global variable 15 to 15, and then dnum 10 will change the dnum to 10. So then these two statements will change the global variable, right? But when you are calling the value function, so inside the value function we have the local fun that assigned to 10, so that's a local variable, and now I am declaring a dnum inside the value function, right? So now here's a memory structure look like for that particular execution. So then we have dnum here, so assigned to 10 from the main method previously, and then so we have the value function. Inside the value function we are declaring the dnum variable, so therefore that dnum is inside the value function, right? So when you say dnum equals 15, so that actually is going to change this dnum to 15, right? Because always we first look at inside the function and then see if there's a variable called dnum. If it is not the case, it is going into the outside. That essentially make this variable invisible to the value function, because it has the same variable name as a global variable name, and then that variable is defined inside the function, right? So therefore if you have the same variable name as the global variable name inside the function, so then function can see only that variable defined inside the function, right? Now in here again global num 30, so that's going to change the global variable num to 30, right? And then as previously, so this is going to throw an error, okay? So that's how the scope of the variable works, okay? Now here is another example. So in here we are declaring an integer variable inside the main, so therefore I is visible inside the main method, and now inside the for loop we run through this and then do some operations based on a number, like num equals I, and then display the number. Now this num is visible inside the for loop only, right? So then Now inside the main method, okay, so we have two code blocks. So first one is the main code block, and then this one is a for loop code block. Right? Now inside the for loop code block, so we have the variable num defined, right, and then we have changed the num based on these values. Right now outside of the for loop, so if I were to display cout num, so that essentially asking the main method to display the value of num. So now num is not available inside the main method, so it really cannot go inside the for loop because it's a separate block of code, right. So then that communication is not going to happen. So then it's going to throw an error saying I don't know what the variable num is, right. So therefore we cannot grow from outer circle to the inner circle. We can always grow from inner circle to the outer circle in general, right. So that's another example of scope of variables. So and this for loop is essentially representing a block of code. So then what are the variable that we define inside that block will be visible only inside that particular for loop block. Okay, all right. So here is another quick example, and then see whether we can identify the scope of these variables. Now we have several variables defined as global variables, some variables inside the main method, and then some variables inside the step method. Now the waltz variable, so is a global variable, so therefore it's accessible to both main and the step program functions. And the next one is the current. The current is also a global variable, so therefore it can be accessible by both main and the step methods. All right. Okay. Now next variable definition is power. Now power is defined inside the main, so therefore it's a local variable to main. Right, so that's the only method that actually can access that particular variable. Right now, inside the step method, so there's a variable called hours, and there's another one called fact part. So both of these variables are local to the step method, so nobody else can really access those data members. All right. So that essentially kind of analyze the scope of variables if you have multiple variables defined in the global area, and main memory area for the main method and the memory area for other methods. Right. So this essentially kind of tell us what are the variables that we can modify, and then what are the variables that we cannot modify from different parts of the program. Right. So that's the scope of the variable. Right. So now it's time for us to do a checkpointing question and then see if we have a good idea about scope of variables. Okay.